Hello, Nicole.
Hi, Jean.
Hello, good to see you. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this short interview about the dialogue of self-liberation. Sorry.
I said, no problem.
Thank you. So, Nicole recently participated in the Dialogue of Self-Liberation live program. And so I'd like to ask you a few questions about your experience of this, please.
Well, to be honest, I think it was quite unconscious. So I wasn't completely aware of the fact that I was speaking to myself in a way that was making things much more difficult. And I was almost just getting in my own way with the way that I was talking to myself, sort of the narration in my mind about what I could or couldn't do, or about um, even some of the things that I found that were in my head when I started analyzing it more clearly, was just things that I'd accumulated over the years of my life that were not necessarily even my own negative words, but like taking on words of others and also perceived impressions of others of what I was doing. And I noticed that there were definitely patterns, and there were certain things that I was really struggling to even start to do or start to approach, based on the way that I was speaking to myself. So I would, let's say I was trying to learn a new skill. I would be saying, like, oh, I can't do this. I'm not able to do this. Um, I'll never be able to do this. I will never be able to do this. Things like that that really weren't justified in any real experience. They were just, yeah, just negative kind of self-defeating thoughts. I think that's a really good way to say it, the way that you put it. So it's almost like before I even was doing certain things, I was feeling like a really big resistance. And sometimes that would lead me to not even try to do some of these things, but they were things that I really needed to or really wanted to do. So I was kind of just building all these walls that were kind of preventing me from moving forward in certain areas of my life.
And how effectively were you able to identify those old self-defeating patterns of self-communication on being first introduced to the material presented to you via the live program?
Well, once I was asked to sort of start to analyze those thought processes, it was almost like before there was just this like thing in the distant background that I didn't even really realize was there. And then once asked to analyze it, it just became crystal clear, like almost like another person speaking directly in my ear. And so once asked to bring attention to it, I was hyper aware of it. And I just had lists and lists and lists of these, like, I can't do this, I will never this, etc., etc. And so I could identify them very easily when you first, asked us to do so. And I was surprised by how much of my inner monologue was actually sort of consumed by these thoughts, sort of in relation to more positive things or even neutral things. It was like almost, like I'd say more than a good chunk, more than 50% was this kind of way of communicating, which was quite surprising and overwhelming initially, actually. Because I was like, no wonder I'm having such a hard time, because it's like having someone constantly suggesting to you that you can't do something. Just um, even in the feeling in the body, I noticed, it was like I was very tense. I was very like quite withdrawn a lot of the time. And yeah, so it was like a physical and kind of mental thing that I noticed there.
In the TDSL live program, we present a number of audio recordings of audio exercises, creative visualization exercises, meditation exercises, and what we call guided contemplations. What was your experience of working with these?
I thoroughly enjoyed those in particular because it felt really nice to be guided, and also like really held accountable and given like a framework, to really in that moment focus on it and be taken through it. And I had different experiences with different kinds of the recordings. So, for example, the ones where we had to speak out loud to ourselves, it felt, some of them initially it was like a real resistance to be speaking in this new way. um, and over time I just started to notice like how much better I felt just saying those words out loud, and then sort of a few weeks later, um, it was much easier. That resistance was kind of gone, and I started to just sort of automatically have those kinds of thought processes instead. So it's almost like it overwrote some of the ways that I had been operating before. So that was a really, really powerful experience. And then I've actually started, if I notice a negative thought now, for example, I'll often, instead of just rephrasing it in my mind, I'll actually say it out loud, as well, which I found was really helpful because you actually hear it feeding back, right? And the guided visualizations and meditations, for example, I found very, very, very powerful. Um, I was getting into very deep states of meditation where you're so you're so in the narrative and in the story that the conscious mind almost like completely went out, but I wasn't asleep. Um, yeah, and the feeling that I would have at the end of the recording, for example, and I would come out, it really felt like I'd gone somewhere and come back like different. Um, and I found like a lot of the techniques that were presented were things that the more you did them, the more you could re-access those feelings, even by just a quick visualization or running through it, like just in the day-to-day kind of process. And for example, even if something difficult or stressful happened and that monologue started, I would listen to that recording again, like in the initial phases, and I found that extremely, extremely transformative. It was like just being a different person before and after listening to them, and suddenly just having that voice gone just made everything feel like much more possible, um, much more relaxed, much more gentle, and I wasn't so reactive, like even towards other people, not even myself. Um, yeah, and I slowly found that I wasn't only like feeling more capable, but I was just generally more motivated to do things as well, because it didn't feel like I had something literally pulling me back. It was just like, oh, I'm really excited about this, and started to reassociate um, the way I was feeling with the positive perspective, which was authentic. It wasn't, this sort of positive affirmation thing, fake it till you make it. It was just being critical and being like, well, these things I'm saying actually aren't true. um, yeah, I think that's how I would describe it.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. You said that when engaging with the guided visualizations and the meditations, that you felt very strongly that you went somewhere, and then when you returned, you felt different. How would you describe the difference?
So it was almost like, I would be like this going in, and everything just felt like really difficult and really, yeah, just resistance is the way I would describe it. Like tension in the body, in the mind, and just feeling like very defeated. Um, like a really physical sensation in the body of like, I can't do this, sometimes even nausea. And then after I did the meditations, it would, I just felt like completely relaxed, completely open. And it was also that I'd had this realization that, you know, I was limiting my perspective on life so much before doing those things, that once going through that, it was like those limits were gone and there were just so many more possibilities of what could happen. It was like waking up on a different day when you were like in a really good mood and really capable after like sometimes quite short meditations. I was very surprised by the power, that transformative power over doing those practices. Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole. I'd like to ask you, in your own words, what is the dialogue of self liberation?
Hmm. Well, there's a particular phrase that you used in a few of the meditations, and if it's okay to share, that I found particularly moving, which was, I free myself with the words I speak. And I would have to say that that kind of really encapsulates what it really meant to me. It was like, what the dialogue of self liberation does is it not only allows you to reflect on your thoughts, first of all, at all, and really like become quite intimate with that inner monologue. And once you're hearing it consciously, you're able to change it. So it's just there's something about looking in and really hearing what's going on. And then instead of just being sort of unconsciously affected by those things, you can then consciously analyze what you're saying. And often when you analyze it, you realize that those things aren't actually true. And you're creating a future for yourself based on these words that are not true. Um, and so you're creating this potential path based on those dialogues, the negative dialogues that will obviously manifest into your life, right? But if you change those dialogues, the things that you manifest become different, and there's all these different paths that now open. So I think that's one way that I would really put it. And the other thing that I really noticed as well was that it started to automatically make me aware of this in the way that I spoke to other people and the way that other people spoke to each other, or the other way other people spoke to themselves. And I could kind of subtly suggest, um, that maybe those things aren't true, or maybe they could like reflect a bit more on the way that they were speaking to themselves, because I'd had this experience and it had really helped me. Um, so yeah, there was just this general sense of like ease and like capability, like as you go through life. And of course, the way that you talk to others also really affects like not only their lives but your own. So everything just felt like a little bit smoother. Um, and then also having those tools of like when maybe you are having a day where it's not so easy to just tune in and say something else, that's when I would start to apply the things that I learned in the meditations, or maybe take some time and go reflect. And instead of being like, oh, I can't do this, I'm never going to feel any differently, um, how am I ever going to change the way I feel? I was like, I know I can change the way I feel because I've experienced it. So I was able to be like, hang on, this is just something that's happening in this moment, but it's not forever and it's not something I can't change. So there was more control of actually shifting how I was feeling in the day to day as well.
How would you describe the dialogue of self liberation and the benefits of the dialogue of self liberation specifically to a friend?
If I was speaking to a friend, which I actually have done, I would just say, so much of the stress and anxiety that they were having when they were sharing with me, um, I would notice that was often coming from themselves more than it was from the external things that were occurring to them. So if I were to explain to someone the dialogue of self liberation, again, it's like it's creating like freedom and other possibilities for yourself, by analyzing your inner monologue and the way that you communicate with yourself. It's the benefit is that once those self-defeating thoughts are gone, that stress and anxiety starts to go away, and that very limited experience that you're having suddenly becomes really big. And you realize that you're doing a lot of this to yourself. It's not all coming from the outside world. And just by shifting, um, and not even just shifting, even just by noticing that inner monologue, you start to have more power in your life to create the life that you want, and to communicate and behave sort of sensitively and gently and lovingly to yourself, which of course spills over into other ways of communicating with people. um, and and that sense of like, oh, everything's so difficult. It's so, I don't know how to get rid of this feeling. I'm just really bogged down. And even like really fast talking like that almost makes it more unconscious. So I even found that I was starting to speak a bit slower when I was getting in those states. And instead of like suddenly being carried by this waterfall or feeling like you're stuck in this thing that's just moving, it's like, if you were in this really fast river, you could suddenly step outside of it and watch that water go by and be like, hang on, I'm not a victim to this thing that's going on. I'm actually partially creating it. And of course, not all of those things come from yourself, but a lot of them do. So you can heal not only the way you speak to yourself, but some of the ways that external factors also have affected you. And just be able to manage them better when they occur. So if I say something to myself, or if someone says something to me, or if I read something or see something, I don't feel like I'm a victim to that thing. There's now a choice. I can be like, hang on, I don't have to accept this feeling. I don't have to accept this belief. I can step outside of it and back into myself and be like, hang on, there's a lot more freedom and possibility here if I just shift those words and really, again, check if they're true.
If more people in the world could learn how to integrate the dialogue of self-liberation into the way they communicate toward themselves, what kind of an influence do you feel that this may potentially have
Hmm.
externally in the world?
So I think, first of all, I think people would have a lot more compassion for each other. So if someone was having like a bad time or feeling stuck in something, someone else may be able to first of all wait and allow that to pass, but then also not say things that will exacerbate that or make it worse. Or we could help each other to speak to each other in more loving ways, which of course is going to have us speak to um, ourselves in more loving ways. It's so interlinked. Like you can't really separate them once you start to do it. So I think the effect that we would have is that everyone would just be a lot more patient and gentle, and actually help each other to become more loving towards ourselves and each other, as opposed to create more and more narratives that were self-defeating, like collectively. Um, yeah, and again, we would have that limit of like what is possible in the future would just be suddenly way more increased, because it would be like, hang on, like anything's possible, of course within reason, but it's like, don't limit yourself to this when you could be this, or when we could be this actually. And I think especially now, it's a really important time, because those negative thoughts that we have towards ourselves, we manifest in our lives and then possibly with each other. So the value of everyone understanding that is we'd be able to spot that, when we were doing that to ourselves, of course, but also when like a friend was doing that to themselves, and it would just help so much to keep constantly coming back to the center. We could help each other do that, and even if you were talking about like wider issues, or even on a very practical level, like solutions to difficulties in the world or in our communities, it would be like, you would no longer be saying like, oh well, this can't ever change or this won't ever happen, because you would know that's not true. So that means you would have all these other options of what to say that were actually solution focused. I think it would make a huge difference.
When you were presented with the information, how straightforward and easy to understand and to work with did you find the information that's being presented in the TDSL Live program?
Yeah, I found it very, very easy and straightforward. And it was great because there were so many different ways to interact with the information. So we had the live session on Zoom, which was very interpersonal and very conversational, and just very beneficial in itself, because there's something about going through that process with other people, which just makes it's more dynamic, but also like you can observe how other people are changing and being affected, and there's a real like support network, and there was a lot of intimacy, and just seeing how it was affecting others as they were going through was again another mirror to see how it could affect you. There was something really powerful about the vulnerability as well, because in our day-to-day lives, especially with people we've never met before, we don't really communicate in that way, but we could, and there was something about everyone going through a process like that together that required a certain vulnerability and a certain honesty. And when we're tapped into that part of ourselves, we have so much more compassion for others as well, because we see them as a whole person that's also going through these difficulties. And we're suddenly communicating from a very different place than if you're just reacting to everything that you're going through. It's like, not only that, it's like it almost shows another way that we could communicate collectively with each other. We don't always need to be putting on this brave face and pretending everything's fine, and like, saying all these things and like trying to be like, so we can be more open and sensitive and vulnerable with each other. And when that happens, everyone's actually able to transform, because they're not acting, they're not putting on this brave face, they're not like performing, and suddenly we're speaking to real individual people. And I think if more people communicated that way, you know, things would be a lot easier, because it would be easier to be sensitive and compassionate to each other, because we would see the difficulties that everyone's going through, instead of all reacting to this like brave face. And also, just to go back to your previous question about how easy it was to work with, I think what was really refreshing about it, not only that there were so many elements to it, and that it was very practical and very active, um, there was really great text as well, but you didn't have to read loads and loads of stuff to get something out of this. It was very practice based. Um, the whole thing could have been done just talking and doing those practices, which made it very embodied and very immediate. It didn't have this thing where it had to go through your whole mind first, and you had to read all these texts and slowly do this thing. It felt very organic, yeah, and very natural.
What difference do you feel this has made for you personally within that short period of 5 weeks?
Well, again, the simplicity of it was actually what was one of the things that was so inspiring. It was like, it felt like such a simple solution that fixed this whole complex interrelated web of all of these different problems, with this one thing. And having that was very, very, very powerful. um and in terms of the duration, it felt so much longer than it was, just because of the transformation. And it wasn't even like slow. It was like every week felt like a huge, it was like, I remember how I felt before we started the first one, and how I felt even by the third one was completely different. And then by the fifth one, I was just like, I can't believe this was only 5 weeks. It just felt like, just applying that one principle essentially, um, made such a huge difference, that it was like I even felt like I looked different by like the end of it. It was just like, as you were finally just breathing this sigh, because you felt like things were possible. And yeah, I've done like quite a few different kind of meditations and different programs and self-improvement things, and I was very, very like, yeah, I was blown away by how much of a difference it made in that period of time, even 3 weeks, honestly. Just that exercise of noticing, writing them, and changing them, and starting to implement it already was huge. Because it's not just this workshop that you go through. It teaches you something that you take forward into everything. um, and it's easy to remember. It's not like all of these millions of things you need to try integrate and do. It's just one thing essentially. um, yeah, so I thought it was really powerful.
I'm absolutely over the moon to hear your experience of this.
I've recommended
Um,
it to several friends, to be honest, because it's like if
Thank you
everyone
very
in our
much.
friend group did that, it would be great. I mean, I would just tell them to do it, honestly. I would be like, look, if you're not sure, like you'll be sure after the first week or two. It's not like the kind of thing where you like go into the first one and it's like, oh, do I like this? It's like it's immediately impactful. Like you'll know straight away that like, okay, wow, this is different. Um, there's something different about this. Because I think what was I was so struck by is how immediately it made a difference as well. It wasn't like, of course, you get better at it and it's a practice that's ongoing, but the change to my life was like fairly immediate, you know. So it's like if you're thinking about doing it and you're not sure, like I just couldn't recommend it enough, basically, because it's not something you're going to have to do for ages and ages before you see results. It's like it's very immediately impactful and transformative. Um, and again, yeah, the simplicity of it, it doesn't take a lot of energy to do. It gives you energy. You know, it doesn't feel like work or effort, you know. Um, it feels empowering and uplifting and energizing. So there's no real downside to it, and it affects literally every single problem that or problem that perceived problem that you have, because it's not restricted to one area, like, oh, I want to improve this aspect of my life, so I'm going to work on that. This actually applies to all of them. So yeah, there's no reason not to do it, really. And of course, it's something that's not only beneficial to you, it's something that becomes beneficial to the people around you as well. So that's another really good reason to do it. And it's really short. It's like, you know, plus that weekly contact of like seeing the same group. Like I said, it was a really kind of intimate and nice experience that I was actually looking forward to every week. It wasn't like, oh, I have to do this thing now and there's loads of stuff to do afterwards. It was like I was really looking forward to doing it, even if it was challenging.
Nicole, I want to say a really, really huge thank you. This has been just wonderful, and this is so helpful. Your descriptions of your experience are going to help other people because this is you leading by example. As we speak about passing the dialogue of self liberation baton, passing the baton to others and leading by example. So, your encouragement to potential new viewers who will see this and think, oh, maybe there's something that I can take a look at here. I'm absolutely certain that what you've said is going to have a really positive influence. And I want to say thank you very much for agreeing to speak about this.
Hmm. Well, I'm just really grateful that I got the opportunity to do it because it really made a huge difference in my life. So thank you.
Wonderful. You're very, very welcome.